Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Commander Lisa Mack. She is here to talk about the United States Coast Guard Ice Patrol. So we'll learn all about that when we come back. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Commander Lisa Mack from the United States Coast Guard, and we are here to talk about Ice Patrol. Very exciting show today. It's Commander Mack's first time on the show, so first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So for those who may not know, what is the Coast Guard Ice Patrol? What's it all about?
Well, we're actually called the International Ice Patrol. We were formed or established as a direct result of the sinking of Titanic. So we've been conducting this mission for almost a century.
Wow.
And we're a single mission unit in the Coast Guard. We are tasked with monitoring iceberg danger in the Northwest Atlantic Ocean and providing that information to mariners.
I wonder if, since you mentioned that this has existed because of the Titanic, once they found the Titanic and were studying it, I wonder if the Coast Guard or any was interested in some of the particulars of maybe damage and just to see what would happen, because an iceberg did strike it and that's what caused it to go down. So I wonder if you could learn from the past, even that 100 years into the past.
Yeah, the Titanic really galvanized the maritime community to improve marine safety. One of the reasons the Titanic did sink was because of its floodable length. It flooded several compartments, which caused it to sink.
The buoyancy to just go away.
Yeah,
but why was it called the unsinkable ship, though?
That I think is somewhat of a myth.
Yeah.
That it was called that before it sank.
Right. But there's really no ship that can't sink given the right circumstances, I guess.
That's probably true,
yeah.
Right?
So anyway, after that, so now an international team, so to speak, and I'm sure there's a lot to it. Observe, patrol, and and just kind of prevent any potential disasters that could occur. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's actually two halves of the operation: the monitor the icebergs and then provide that information. So we monitor, we conduct our own reconnaissance. We get iceberg information from several sources, but we also conduct our own reconnaissance. Air Station Elizabeth City provides an HC-130J Super Hercules aircraft, the Coast Guard's long-range surveillance aircraft. So we provide some ice observers on that plane, head up to Newfoundland and operate out of there every other week during our ice season. And then, and that's to find the locations of the icebergs. And then in our operations center here in New London, that's where we assimilate information. We run our computer model and provide the information.
It's interesting that you do the the analysis so far away from actually where the icebergs are, because there obviously aren't any around where we're taping, which is where your facility is located.
And it's a function of the U.S. took on this responsibility in 1913.
Yeah.
That's why it's set up that way.
Now, did it really take a disaster the size of the Titanic for it to really galvanize society in general to have something like this? I mean, when that happens, you think, well, we got to do something for the future.
Right. I think the loss of life really caused the maritime nations of the world to get together and say, we need some international convention for safety at sea. Now,
does it make sense for those nations that are very, technologically advanced maritime-wise to be involved in something like this? Or does it make more sense for the countries that are closest to where the icebergs are to sort of like take the lead role in something like this?
Well, that's essentially what happened. The U.S., shortly after the Titanic sank in May of 1912, the U.S. already had ships on the Grand Banks warning mariners of iceberg danger. So the following year, the international community asked the U.S. to take it again, and that's when the Revenue Cutter Service, the precursor to the Coast Guard, conducted the mission. So the international part is really the treaty that set up the Ice Patrol, and it asks the U.S. to run it.
By asking the U.S., did they do that because of the resources available to a country like the United States? They were actually physically able to do it? Yeah.
Right, that was part of it, and that they had voluntarily sent ships to do it in 1912.
It's interesting. Off the air, we were talking about the evolution of how things started out. Obviously, back during the Titanic days, once this started, it was all about sending other ship cutters, I guess, out there, ships themselves to observe.
Right.
And then once air flight became more feasible to do kind of reconnaissance, things like that, then it went to air flight, and then eventually it's going to get more toward satellite technology, which it already is starting anyway now, right? So, so the technology certainly is an amazing factor in how the Ice Patrol's job can just be done even better.
Yeah, and certainly even with ships, the invention of radar has certainly helped them.
Didn't help the Titanic, though.
Right.
They had radar, didn't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Communications 24/7, all of that improves safety. So the Ice Patrol is really providing the area where there are icebergs, so the ships can avoid them.
By the way, are ships in general designed better these days as far as avoiding potential disasters like that?
Yeah, certainly the things we talked about, designed differently, so can survive a collision better than it could have, the Titanic.
And since there are ships that exist that are icebreakers themselves, they certainly aren't really in much danger, I would imagine. And they can get stuck just like anything else, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah, we're really talking about ships transiting the Atlantic, so not too many of them are ice strengthened. Some of them probably are because they will go further north.
Does it, depending on the year, I guess, depending on how mild or severe the winter is, and maybe how warm the summer is, determines, because you're always things are very fluid when it comes to icebergs, and there's new ones here. This doesn't exist anymore. How does that work?
Yeah, there are lots of factors that determine how many icebergs get as far south as the transatlantic shipping lanes. Should I?
Yeah, let's put this up right now.
Yeah,
we'll switch over to a graphic on the screen, but let's kind of put
this is a little bit of geography. You can see Greenland, the Labrador coast of Canada, and Newfoundland. So icebergs, most of the icebergs we see in our op area come from the west coast of Greenland. They circulate up here in Baffin Bay, come down the cold Labrador Current. And in some years we can get icebergs down here at the tail of the Grand Banks. So the Titanic sank actually south of this latitude. Some years they're restricted to the Labrador coast. Depends on weather, how strong the current is, how much sea ice there's been that year. So there's a lot of factors that can play into how long an iceberg can survive to get down here.
But if it can, that's pretty impressive that it can actually.
That is a very long journey.
Does it dissolve a lot from where it starts to where it gets down there?
The sea ice is a big factor in that because it can preserve an iceberg for quite a long time. And obviously the size. We had a very large iceberg that came off of a glacier in Greenland in 2010. It made the very large piece got down here in 2011, lasted for months. So, and this water can get pretty warm in the summer. So the size, all those things factor into.
Now, aside from early warning detection, can you actually do anything physically with an iceberg to make it less of a danger?
That's a very good question. The Ice Patrol has done several experiments in our history. In the late 50s, 1960s, we actually did some testing with bombs. The problem with that is it tends to make smaller icebergs, which are more difficult to track and detect.
It's exactly the same thing they say with the problem with if a asteroid or a meteor is on the way. If you blow it up, you're turning one dangerous object into a bunch of smaller dangerous objects, and on a lesser scale, blowing up an iceberg would probably cause the same problem, right?
Right, and a smaller iceberg is more difficult for a ship to detect, so those are really the most dangerous when they get small in size and you can't see them visually or on radar when they have a low profile. So the bombing experiment was pretty short-lived.
Now, icebergs are fluid. So I mean, can they be literally moved per se? Or?
There actually is a company on the Grand Banks that manages icebergs for the oil and gas industry, and they have an operation to deflect icebergs.
Okay, if they're coming toward the platform.
Right, so they can tow them. They have or they can, if it's small enough, they can use water to deflect it.
Yeah.
So they have a few different methods to do it.
So you could physically actually move, if it's not too big, you can actually divert its trajectory.
Right, depending on the size.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've been talking all about the North. Does Antarctica, does the South Pole have these kind of issues too?
They do have quite a number of icebergs. The National Ice Center in Suitland, Maryland actually tracks Antarctic icebergs. There is a size threshold. I'll have to
that's okay.
look up what the.
Just kind of asking in a general
I think it's
sense.
10 miles and larger. They track, and generally because they do it with satellite.
Okay. Is there less shipping down there? Is that why it's not as much of an issue?
There's quite a bit less shipping.
Okay.
But that could change in the future as resources
That's true. Yeah.
become available.
Right now, it's like sort of there's a treaty about the international territory.
There is an international
nobody
treaty.
claims it or anything like that. It's interesting, but it's just fascinating. Now, aircraft, which is what you're, for the most part, what you're using now.
Right.
Do you still use ships, by the way?
We don't use cutters anymore.
Okay, no more cutters.
We did have an overlap there between the cutters and the aircraft after World War II, and we continue to use cutters for oceanographic studies
Right.
up until the mid-'80s, but since then we haven't used cutters.
Just like there's an overlap in between aircraft and satellite technology, correct? Eventually, it's going to switch over to all satellite.
And we are currently using the sources or resources that we have available. Right. The challenge is visibility isn't very good, so visible satellites aren't very helpful.
Right, but I would imagine the resolution on those things will improve greatly in each generation. Right?
And as they launch more, it'll improve greatly. So.
And you can really do a better job because you're limited on the aircraft by range and fuel. Those things are all expensive. You can only go so far. Satellite, especially if you got more than one, they're covering everything.
Right. Yeah. The challenge is.
Is it an expense though? I mean, obviously budgets are an issue, right?
It is. I think as they launch more satellites, the data will be more accessible than it is currently. And there's a lot of data to process, so you have
to. That's all coming out of your place, right? Yeah.
You have to kind of overcome those things. The nice thing is we have a big partnership called the North American Ice Service, which is the National Ice Center that I mentioned, and the Canadian Ice Service, and they're very well equipped to do satellite reconnaissance.
I hear people talking a lot about climate change and global warming. Whether it exists or not, if it does, then you would notice it because you would see what's going on with the changes as far as the melting of the icebergs. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's another very good question. There is so much interannual variability in how many icebergs we see in our area that it's very difficult to see any kind of climate change signal. It's estimated that only 1% or less of the ice that comes off of Greenland in the form of icebergs actually gets to our area.
Okay.
So that's a very small percentage of what ice comes off. So it's very difficult to see that signal.
Since Canada is closer, do they have a more active role in, what they do up there? Yeah,
they actually have a very big sea ice surveillance program the Canadian Ice Service runs. They also help us with icebergs. But in our North American Ice Service partnership, we split the responsibility for that area temporally. So the Ice Patrol does it between February and August is when we're producing the products and issuing the warnings. And the remainder of the year, when the icebergs are further north on the Labrador coast.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great way to save resources and give one source of information for the mariner.
And you're sharing at all times.
Right. We actually we use the same computer model, and we have a synchronized database, so we can back each other up anytime.
We're going to take a break and come back. Sure. We've got a lot more to get to. Is there a website people can go and learn a little bit more?
There is. It's on the U.S. Coast Guard's Navigation Center webpage. If you
just
search for International Ice Patrol, you can get there.
All right, and we'll put a graphic up on the screen too. Commander Lisa Mack from the Ice Patrol. We will take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Commander Lisa Mack of the United States Coast Guard, and she's part of Ice Patrol, this is a very fascinating subject that we're talking about. This was established right after the Titanic sank, and it's been going strong ever since. Since it has been going on since that point, what's the record as far as iceberg collisions since then in general, at least in that neck of the woods?
We're pretty proud of our record that no ship heeding our warnings has struck an iceberg.
Wow. Well, the technology has improved, so the warning system is out there, and that's fantastic, really.
Yeah.
It's quite a safety record.
Really what we're providing is kind of a balance of safety and mobility to give the transatlantic mariner the shortest route while avoiding ice.
Right. So that's an amazing statistic. No iceberg collisions. Who have heeded your warning? If they want to go off and do their own thing, well then, they're responsible for their own actions.
Yeah, certainly there are ships that by necessity
have to kind of risk it.
Have to encounter ice.
Yeah.
So there have been collisions inside our limit and in areas that we don't patrol. The North Atlantic is our area. So there's certainly icebergs other places.
Right. Now, would you recommend, I mean, obviously you certainly wouldn't, when you're talking about a dangerous situation like that, is it possible for you to provide or somehow, advise to plot a different course, or is it impossible to not have to go through a somewhat dangerous territory, icebergs there, just to get to the point where you need to go?
We generally advise mariners to go around the iceberg limit. If they have to go to a location or their destination
is it way out of the way though if they have to do that?
It can be depending on the time of year. So you could maybe have to go a few extra 100 miles, which is a lot of time.
Yeah,
for
it could
a
be
ship.
significant. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. So I want to talk about Commander Mack and her day-to-day duties. What would be the best way to describe your title, by the way?
Well, I'm basically the commanding officer of the unit.
All right, so now day-to-day duties for you, obviously you're commanding others, but your particular facility, it basically analyzes the information, the data that comes in. So was it a lot of charts, a lot of computer readouts, things like that?
It's a lot of computer work.
Yeah.
We have an application that runs a computer model that where we enter the iceberg information, and then we use a lot of environmental data. We use weather, waves, winds, ocean currents to give us a prediction of where those icebergs will be at a certain time, and that's what we base our products on.
Do you have to, is everybody a meteorologist that works at your place?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We only have 16 people.
Okay.
We have 4 officers. We have 2 civilians that are technical experts. One is an IT specialist, and the other
for the computers. You need
right,
that.
right, because we have some customized applications, and then we have an oceanographer who's our chief scientist. Some of the officers have master's degrees in oceanography. And then some of our enlisted personnel, we have 9 marine science technicians and an administrative person, but some of them have specialized weather training.
I think UConn over in Groton, don't they have oceanography courses over there?
They do have a marine science program. Actually, one of our marine science technicians is taking
a graduate,
some classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been a good resource for us.
He can recommend it, that it works out well. Depending on the time of year it is, does your job and your staff's job change significantly, or?
Yeah, when we're in season, we call it in season, between February and July or August, when the icebergs are the furthest south, we're very much engaged operationally.
So you're analyzing, that's when your data's coming in?
Right, so we may have a plane up in St. John's, which is our personnel, and then we have a full-time watch doing products. The rest of the year, September to December, is what we call our off-season, where we try to catch up with everything that we didn't get done during the operational season.
What do you have to get done? What is catching up? Paperwork, or?
Well, yeah, paperwork. We write a report every year of the season. Special projects, for example, we're updating our computer application, which is significant because it's dated. We have done some studies recently. We did a satellite reconnaissance study. We're currently doing a customer needs study. So we try to do some things like that.
Is the data that comes in very different from satellite reconnaissance as opposed to the aircraft, or is it pretty much the same? Your ability to analyze it and such.
The aircraft can actually identify much better than a satellite can.
Oh, at this point, huh? Well, I can understand then why you haven't fully transferred over, because the technology isn't quite, the definition, I guess the imagery isn't quite there yet on the satellites?
Yeah, you can certainly tell a target is there.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what that is the challenge.
Right.
That's a fairly high traffic area. There's domestic fishing, international fishing, the oil and gas industry with the supply vessels, and then there's transatlantic mariners. So there's a lot of targets to figure out what they are.
The military goes through there too, right? Yeah.
So that's really the challenge with satellites, is trying to
But as
tell what
you
it
can
is.
imagine that the technology, the resolution on the cameras will certainly improve. There may come a point where the satellite technology is, you may have a sharper image with that than you would, you know, with aircraft. Granted, the aircraft is lower, but as we talked about, the range is limited, the cost for fuel. I mean, there's trade-offs. For
Right,
cost.
certainly cost is a big factor. And the aircraft is certainly gives us a good area of searching. Much more than a ship. So we're obviously better than cutters, but satellite could do more for us.
Now, as a commander of your staff, you know, I asked you about your day-to-day duties. Obviously, having good and qualified people, you just kind of let them do their job. Everybody knows what they do, and it's just a good symbiotic relationship there.
Yeah, most of my role is external to the unit. We have a deputy commander whose role is really to run the unit on
More
a daily
hands-on,
basis.
yeah.
Yeah, she's a qualified watchstander. She stands watch. She also flies. I don't do that so much. My role is mostly our partnerships with the air station, the Canadian Ice Service, kind of facilitating that sort of thing.
And don't forget, you're also the de facto PR person, apparently, too, coming on TV shows like this.
Right.
But you know, it's sort of like a field trip for you. I mean, your job may not necessarily be the same all the time, so it must be nice to get out and do something different, even if it is, it's kind of a nice thing to be able to promote what you do and talk about it, you know?
Yeah, we certainly like to tell the Ice Patrol story. We're proud of our history. We're coming up on our centennial in April of 2013, so that'll be kind of a landmark for us.
That's impressive. Now, I want to talk about you coming up, you know, through the ranks to where you are now. Was this sort of a goal for you? Did it have some interest for you, or what kind of other stuff did you do before this?
I did go to the academy and study marine science, so I was aware that the Ice Patrol was
that it existed,
right, and a possible job for me. I've spent a lot of time in other areas of ice operations. The Coast Guard does domestic ice breaking. We also do polar ice breaking, so I've been involved in both of those.
But that's still, ice is still a part of it, though. I mean, you definitely have, you know, picked out, you have a career choice, and even though there are little different things, and even though it's in the Coast Guard, you have still stayed in that general vein of ice in some respects.
Right,
you know?
right. It's a pretty small community.
You know everybody there.
Right, it's a pretty small program, but it's certainly been very interesting for me.
Is there anything that you would want people to know that they may not be aware of as far as Ice Patrol goes, or you're certainly not trying to stay under the radar, and you just kind of want to get, maybe someone could sort of pique their interest by watching something like this, and maybe you know, sort of desire a career in this direction, right?
Well, I think most of the people that come to the Ice Patrol do it for the same reasons people come in the Coast Guard, is to be of service. And the other one is sort of an adventurous sort of vein. Because that's not something people do every day.
Right. It's a very specialized field. You
right.
know.
So I think that's why people like to do this mission.
And there's a little bit of a, you know, there's kind of an excitement aspect to it too. You know what I mean? And just, you know, analyzing the data and knowing that it's a very fluid situation. Not to put a play on words there, but things are always changing. So
right. It is
you
very
can
dynamic.
never take your eyes off of it for very long, because things are always happening, and a lot of people's safety is basically in your hands, right? Analysis can't be wrong. You can't make a mistake without someone being in a little bit of a danger. Right? So it makes sense. Is your place available, like if somebody would want to like tour it or anything like that?
We do do quite a few school tours.
Okay, so field trips, things like that.
We can certainly do that.
Okay, and also we were mentioning off the air too, we'll put the website up one more time as we wrap up the show, but any events that might be coming up, you can kind of just follow along on the website. What's the website have that might, as far as particular interest for people?
Well, we consider it has two functions. One is to get our products to the mariner. So there is a products page. We also have some history articles. We have some details about oceanography.
Yeah, going back to the Titanic days, right?
Right, and how we use oceanography to conduct the mission. And then there is a public affairs page. You can look at photos, some video clips, things like that.
When you say products to the consumer, what does that mean exactly? Do your analysis data?
Right. We issue what we call an iceberg limit, which is basically a line in the ocean that says if you stay out of this area, you will not encounter ice. And we provide that via text and via graphic, so a chart.
When you're there at the facility, how often does an actual emergency situation coming up where immediate action needs to be taken because of what's going on?
We have that happen probably a few times a season.
A season, okay.
Yeah, where an iceberg is reported and it's outside the limit, potentially, or near the limit. We like to warn mariners of that too. It's
a fascinating, job for somebody to have, and it's very interesting to hear about it. We'll put the graphic for the website up one more time. Commander Lisa Mack of the Ice Patrol, part of the United States Coast Guard. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. We will see you next time. Take care.